let me ask you a quick question. You know, I talked to American Hodl, who is another Bitcoiner, and he expressed to me an interesting thought. I'll get your view on it. First of all, I have to establish, are you a millennial?
Yeah, I think I'm just a millennial. I'm not a Zoomer.
Okay.
I'm 28. So
he said that Bitcoin is essentially a millennial phenomenon and that Gen Z are just along for the ride. And he kind of dissed them and saying, you know what, they don't really know what's going on. Can you comment on this, Nic Carter?
Well, I mean, when I was at the same age that the Zoomers are today, I also didn't care about Bitcoin. So I can't fault them for not really being that interested in Bitcoin. I mean, your financial portfolio is like a grown-up thing. So when I was 21, I wasn't really that focused on, my asset allocation. You don't have any assets when you're young. And I think the Zoomers actually have this kind of nihilism about them. I've kind of noticed they actually feel like somewhat hopeless, or they feel that the world is a little absurd. The millennials are depressed because they've been kind of frozen out of the ability to, get on the corporate ladder and save, because all financial assets are too expensive. The Zoomers have just taken it to a level of absurdism where, they sort of realize that their prospects are dim because of the way that society is configured. But I don't see a lot of engagement with Bitcoin among them. I mean, they're more focused on becoming like a TikTok celebrity or something, which I think in of itself is telling, because if you have this stage of degeneration of the fiat regime, saving, becomes less important. It becomes de-emphasized. Long-term planning becomes impossible, right? And everyone fixates on becoming an overnight success and get-rich-quick schemes. So I think that's why, if you ask a Chinese youth, well, what do you want to do for a career? They might say, technical degree, become an engineer or something. Yes, an American youth, they'll say, I want to be an influencer and make a ton of money really quickly. And I think that doesn't just reflect the cultural attitudes. I think it reflects where we are from kind of a monetary perspective. If you feel your savings being debased, you're not going to want to plan for a long-term career. You're just going to try and become a celebrity or something. So I don't see that much engagement with Bitcoin for the Zoomers, but I guess that's our job, is to reach them.
Right. I do want to add that we do have quite a few Gen Z in our Orangeville podcast Telegram group. They mostly come in there and say, hey, my mom or my dad watches you and told us about Bitcoin, and that's why they're there. But, in terms of, I want to kind of segue to another thing you tweeted. You've been on fire on Twitter lately, by the way. Your tweets are just like on fire. You tweeted that, quote, once you start thinking of Bitcoins as a continuous quantity like a liquid rather than discrete units like atoms, things start to make a lot more sense. Make sense of this for us.
Yeah, so for some reason on Bitcoin Twitter, we've been having a lot of metaphysical debates recently. That tweet was inspired because I'd had a discussion with Francis Coppola on the What Bitcoin Did podcast.
Yeah.
And, we had a long discussion on that show about whether Bitcoin is truly scarce because it's divisible. And the way, I think it's easier to think of, you get confused when you start trying to boil Bitcoin down to the smallest unit, down to the satoshi, and you start wondering, well, maybe couldn't you just create more decimal places and infinitely, maybe it's infinitely divisible. And I think it's a little confusing, especially because Bitcoin is this dematerialized, digital thing. I think of it as a single quantity, which then gets divided up into different segments. And so, UTXOs, to me, those are containers, and they contain sort of arbitrary quantities of Bitcoin. And, I think this is a better analogy to think about it, because it's actually not a cash scheme where you have bills like DigiCash or any of those other eCash schemes where you had serialized kind of bills, right, in different denominations. You'd have many fixed denomination bills and you'd have to sort of recirculate them. Like, those were prior eCash schemes. Part of Satoshi's genius was he just treated Bitcoin as this kind of continuous quantity, and you're just managing the transfer of different quantities of Bitcoin, and it sort of flows through the network, and the protocol makes sure that there's no additional Bitcoin being created. So it's a metaphysical debate, but I guess because Bitcoin is so hard to really reason about, I think it's important to sometimes, you rely on these analogies, basically.
Right. I tweeted something not too long ago where basically the idea was there is one Bitcoin.
Yeah.